Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this IT governance webinar on British Standard 2012, an introduction. I'm Tomás Pinto, and I'm going to be your host for today. I am a GDPR consultant, and I have a legal background with an emphasis on privacy and data protection, also with a focus on technology, and I'll be guiding you through today's webinar. A little bit about IT governance. This organization is really a one-stop shop for organizations of all sizes and sectors, which offers a broad range of products and services, ranging from software, e-learning, consulting, training, and publishing. At the heart of the activities of IT governance is cyber resilience and data protection, specifically GDPR. IT governance is able to deliver an integrated set of services such as incident response and business continuity or penetration testing, and even compliance with all the necessary components that allows organizations to prepare for the current and nowadays cyber threats. Today, I will walk you through discussions around British Standard 2012, and we will begin by understanding what is a personal information management system. And this is what I will refer to as a PIMS. On the other hand, we will see what is the British Standard 10,012. And also, we will look into how can a PIMS, specifically one aligned to the specifications of British Standard 10,012, how can it benefit your organization? Specifically, how it can facilitate compliance with the GDPR. We'll also look into the fact and to the possibility of integrating this management system, the personal information management system, with other management systems, as, for example, an ISO information security management system. Namely, we'll look into the differences between an information security management system and the topic of today, the personal information management system. And finally, how to implement a personal information management system and how to achieve certification to the British Standard 10,012. At the end of our discussion, we'll have some time reserved for questions, for Q&A. At that time, I encourage you to forward your questions through the chat functionality that you will find in your GoToWebinar dashboard. And at that time, I'm happy to take all of your questions. Now, what is a personal information management system, a PIMS? Well, it's really a systematic approach to managing personal information in line with modern data protection requirements and risks. What it does is that it addresses the management and governance of organizational activities relating to personal information, or, as the GDPR specifies it, personal data. It also allows organizations to safeguard their personal information by implementing the appropriate controls. Now, this is relevant because most organizations process some sort of personal information, and many class it as an organizational asset. Because of this reliance on personal information, especially in this in today's data-driven paradigm we live in, organizations need to implement the appropriate controls to safeguard their data, namely their personal data. And personal data, as we know, can take many forms and appear in many places and from different interfaces across the organization. For example, human resources records or customer databases and even email inboxes and so on. And the fact is that there is no single technological solution that can possibly protect all of this while still complying with the law. A personal information management system might be a solution, a strong solution for this purpose. Now, British Standard 10,012 is really simply, it's a standard that sets out a specification for a personal information management system. Basically, it's a standard that designs, that allows organizations following its approach in designing a personal information management system. And it provides a framework for maintaining and improving compliance with data protection requirements and good practice. What it does as well is that it describes the requirements for a personal information management system, which is a systematic and process-based approach to managing personal data in line with the requirements of data protection nowadays. And in the case of British Standard 2012, it is specifically aligned with the GDPR and the UK Data Protection Act of 2018. So British Standard 2012 is really the first standard to completely align with these two regulations, and that has really strong potential for organizations seeking a formal approach based on best practice and supported by a formal certification program. It really has a lot to offer. What it does, by being aligned with the laws, namely GDPR and the Data Protection Act of 2018, is that it specifies clearly the requirements and organizes them into a coherent set of practices that any organization of size and sector can implement. A structured approach such as this helps the organizations ensure they are proactively working towards compliance with GDPR and other requirements. Of course, I say other requirements because there will be extra considerations and needs that are unique to the organization. But those can also be identified and implemented as part of the PIMS, and specifically by the PIMS set out in the British Standard 2012. What I mean with this is that the standard and the PIMS that it creates, it is also designed for the purpose of identifying other requirements other than GDPR or the Data Protection Act. For example, it is possible that organizations need to address other legislation or regulations arising from different sectors, such as healthcare or education, and even other jurisdictions in cases of organizations working in different markets, in different jurisdictions. It is also possible that some organizations will have to deal with contractual requirements from their clients, from other external parties. And maybe they want to manage and build into their personal information management system their own specific approach to manage personal information due to ethical principles or ways of operating as an organization. All of those can be embedded and taken into consideration into the personal information management system that the British Standard 2012 sets out. In fact, the British Standard 2012 outlines all the core requirements organizations need to consider when collecting, storing, processing, retaining, or even disposing of personal records related to individuals. But it also, as I explained, allows to manage the specific requirements that are relevant to each organization on top of the general data protection laws, such as GDPR. Now, certification, it's not still possible against any accredited certification scheme for BS 10,012. Nevertheless, this PIMS and the British Standard 2012 can be tied in to an existing ISO 27001 certificate, for example, for an information security management system. And we know this to be true because IT governance actually achieved the world's first accredited ISO 27001 and BS 10,012 certificate in July. And basically what it did is that the ISMS certificate mentions also British Standard 10,012 on the certification document. And this is really a sensible way to go if you want to demonstrate conclusively that you've taken as an organization the appropriate and externally validated action to deal with your privacy and information security compliance requirements under the GDPR. Obviously, we already touched on some of the benefits, but really there's a lot of advantages in taking this approach and implementing and certifying against British Standard 2012 for the personal information management system. First of all, it allows organizations to comply with business, legal, contractual, and regulatory requirements. And what it does is really it displays a commitment that your organization is meeting the requirements of the GDPR and the Data Protection Act, demonstrating not only compliance, but also accountability for that compliance. On top of it, it allows you to deal with security risks. So a personal information management system can also help organizations identify and mitigate the information security risks for the personal information processed. More effective would be, integrating the British Standard 10012 with information security management system set out by 27001 to really mitigate those information security risks in a very effective way. This, of course, will reduce the risk of infringement and breaches, which in turn will protect organizations from financial penalties and losses, and their reputation. Basically, a PIMS safeguards organizations' reputation from damaging publicity relating to data security violations or GDPR infringements, for example, and potential prosecution. What it does as well is that it provides a capability statement to the external world. So basically, a PIMS presents a public and independent statement of your organization's capability to protect individuals' personal data, which, for example, may help when responding to tenders and generally in winning new business and retaining your existing customers that demand that assurance of your arrangements for data protection. Also, it allows organizations to obtain an independent opinion about your data protection arrangements. This, in turn, reduces the need for frequent audits from other parties when before engaging with you for business. Now, this is external, but also internally, it has some benefits because a certified PIMS really allows organizations to obtain stakeholder confidence. So internal stakeholders, think about shareholders and top management. For example, DPOs or other privacy and data protection internal workers are expected to provide evidence to senior management and the organization generally, for example, to the board members. They need to provide evidence of their progress in the privacy regulatory compliance. And this compliance evidence can be shown with an effective and certified PIMS. Lastly, implementing an effective personal information management system will improve the structure and focus of data privacy management since it allows organizations to, for example, embed personal data management into the organization's culture. So it turns the data privacy and privacy compliance and data protection compliance will begin to be a matter of course for the organization implementing an effective personal information management system. And this will also have as a side effect improved data governance. So a better way to handle and manage personal data also for business business benefits on top of compliance reasons. And what it does is that a PIMS allows you to take a risk-based approach to data privacy management. It also encourages your organization to engage in continual improvement, to adapt to changes of the business inside and outside of the organization. So as the way our organization works, but also how regulations evolve, how the opinions of the regulators evolve towards certain processing of personal data activities. And as I mentioned, it also allows you to integrate your personal information management system with other management systems. Again, such as the ISO 27001 for information security management system and others. Now, the GDPR does not explain exactly many provisions. For example, it does not explain what technical and organizational measures mean, even though it requires them in several provisions. So these requirements can be met by implementing a personal information management system against the British Standard 2012. And the controls, the policies, the procedures that it mandates to manage an individual's personal data effectively will be implemented by following this British standard. Basically, the standard makes these legally subjective terms that we find in the GDPR more concrete. And whereas the GDPR is not so prescriptive, the British Standard 10012 provides more concrete guidance and requirements in order to fulfill the GDPR requirements. Moreover, the standard creates mechanisms not only to fulfill the requirements, but also to show accountability for the fulfillment of these requirements. which again demonstrates compliance, which is something required by Article 5.2 of the GDPR, the principle or the pseudo principle of accountability. So in some, for example, the British Standard 2012 really details all the ingredients of a system of personal data controls. So producing registers of interested parties, defining individual roles and responsibilities, writing policies and procedures, providing training and awareness, and even monitoring your compliance with laws. Another advantage of the British Standard 2012 is that it follows the same structure and the same set of broad requirements used by the ISO management system standards, such as ISO 9001. So all the clauses, all the standard clauses that you will find in those standards will also be found in British Standard 2012. For example, context of the organization or leadership, support and operation, all of those will be found in the British Standard 2012. This means, as I mentioned, that for organizations that already manage compliance demands by conforming to ISO standards, the PIMS, the British Standard 2012 can be integrated with existing processes to avoid replicating effort, to avoid duplications, and really to take advantage of experiencing developed in other disciplines. So every other arrangements you created in your organization for other management systems, for other purposes, can be adapted to also accommodate British 2012 needs and requirements. For example, your internal audit activities and the skills necessary for them, they are widely applicable. So an existing internal audit function in your organization can easily be adapted to new requirements, such as those in the British Standard 2012. And this is really a strong advantage because it does not really add too much on top. Rather, it broadens the scope of application of their existing processes in terms of managing their management systems. So I mentioned the integration that is possible with ISO 27001, and really I'm emphasizing the marriage between British Standard 2012 and ISO 27001 because together they can really provide a strong compliance approach to GDPR. And just really to clear out the air here, just to know the difference between an ISMS and a PIMS. So an ISMS stands for Information Security Management, and it's really a systematic approach consisting of processes, technology and people that helps your organization protect and manage all information, so all data. The ISO 27001 is the international management standard that provides the specification for the information security management system. On the other hand, the British Standard 2012 is rather a British standard that outlines the specifications for a personal information management system. Now, the framework has been developed to help organizations to comply with the data protection requirements imposed by laws such as GDPR. So it has a more specific mandate, this standard. And instead of catering to addressing all of the organization's information, it really focuses in providing a framework for collecting, storing, processing, retaining or disposing of personal records related to individuals, i.e. personal data or personal information. So while there is an overlap between the two of them, and certainly because you can actually design them based on standards that have common structures, they will be different in nature, in their targets, but there's certainly an overlap in there. Now, in terms of implementing a PIMS, it's important to note that British Standards 2012 is a process-based approach to data protection that aligns clearly and precisely with the GDPR requirements and organizes them into a coherent set of practices that any organization can implement. It has several key requirements, and they are aligned to those of the GDPR, and again, set into a management framework. So all the articles that dictate a requirement, an obligation for controllers, i.e. organizations processing personal data, all of those are systematized coherently in the British Standard 2012. And this really helps the organization coordinate these key practices necessary to protect personal information in line with this regulation. Also, it helps develop the records that provide evidence that these practices are in place. And again, think about Article 30 records of processing activities, data protection impact assessments, or even personal data breach reporting, and so on. All of these are taken into account by the British standard and made into processes that are measurable, repeatable, and organized in this coherent set of requirements built into a management framework, the personal information management system. For example, for each process with DPIA or a personal data breach and other activities that need to be performed by organization when complying with GDPR, for all of those, the standard will mandate or at least recommend the creation of, for example, appropriate documentation for all the processes, the working instructions, and even the allocation of resources, and even roles and responsibilities for each process. One example of a set of requirements set out in the standards, it's really, for example, leadership. So this you will find in other in ISO standards, for example, as I explained earlier, and the British standard will direct organizations on how to establish strong leadership in the project that is, GDPR compliance or managing personal data generally. So, of course, like any other project, the PIMS must be led from the top of the organization. So here we're talking really about tone from the top. So basically, the standard requires top management and or the boards to take an active interest in data protection and make it clear that is a priority for the organization. And this is, in some instructions in the standard, allows you to achieve this as an organization. Obviously, because implementing a management system requires the involvement of the entire organization. As I mentioned earlier, it mandates that an organization deals and manages adequately personal data as a matter of course. And this is more an example of a generic requirement that links with the GDPR specific requirements set out in the British 2012. Risk management and DPIAs are, again, an example of one of those processes and requirements found in both the standard and the GDPR, because obviously compliance is supported by risk management, which clearly aligns with the GDPR's requirement that data controllers, i.e. organizations, take appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect personal data and ensure compliance with the regulation. So this is only possible by conducting risk management, by having a strong risk management capability. And that includes including a capability to conduct data protection impact assessments, DPIAs, that we can find in Article 35. So this DPIA process, for example, will be built into the personal information management system and will really allow the organization to navigate the applicable risks and requirements. With this, I mean the identification of risks regarding information security, the risks to the organization, the risks to data subject, and so on, but also to identify requirements arising from the GDPR and other laws, if applicable to the organization. So this is just another example of how the PIMS and the British Standard 2012 will cater for the need of organizations to address the obligations on GDPR to conduct risk management, to conduct risk assessments, namely data protection impact assessments. Now, in addition to processes for managing compliance with data protection laws, including the GDPR, the standard also describes general management system processes. And while this might seem initially, while it may seem to be a layer of bureaucracy, they're really essential for ongoing compliance. So the British Standards 2012 general management processes really operates on three bases. First of all, in ensuring that the organization complies with the GDPR, but also maintaining that compliance and showing evidence of this compliance. And to this end, it describes the requirements for critical practices. First of all, it has certain requirements in clause 7 in terms of the managing documentation, including documentation that contain personal data, and also documentation necessary for the effectiveness of the personal information management system. It also describes requirements for training and awareness programs, and, for example, allocating resources, and also in terms of monitoring and measuring the effectiveness of data protection activities, and having management reviews, corrective actions, and continual improvement of the personal information management system. So all of those are described and set out in the British Standard 10,012. In terms of processes and documentation, ISO management systems and British Standard 10,012 really take the position that the best way to minimize risks related to information, to data, is to look at data protection, for example, from first principles. So starting from a set of policies that inform processes and determine how users interact with the data. And these activities produce records of the organization's compliance activities. So obviously the PIMS policy, or the organization's data protection policy, or the personal information management system policy, if you will, is naturally at the heart of the management system for personal information. And all other data protection policies and processes will operate under its guidance. So the data protection policy, the PIMS policy, will inform all other ramifications. For example, if there is a personal data breach policy, it will be guided and informed by that more high-level PIMS policy. And the standard really provides an extremely thorough description of the content that should be included in the policy, ranging from stating that the organization approach has to be described in there. So what is the organization's approach to processing personal data? Also mentions the need to show and to state the commitment of the organization to uphold data processing principles and data subject rights, and on to identify key stakeholders, both internal and external, and also the critical roles within the organization. So the standard really explains and guides the users on how to create an effective policy. And like any other core policy, it has to be considered and developed early on in the implementation project, because again, it will inform everything else that follows. It will, of course, need to be approved and issued by top management, even be signed by top management, showing their involvement in the project, in the mandate of the PIMS. And again, out of this policy, every other policy and processes will cascade, not only to comply with the GDPR, but to establish and maintain the PIMS that ensures the ongoing GDPR compliance. In terms of certification to British Standard 10,012, the GDPR states that certification mechanisms can be used as a method to demonstrate compliance, which is very much in line with the already mentioned accountability principle, patent in Article 5.2 of the GDPR. And even though the GDPR contemplates this possibility of certification, at this moment in time, there is no really a GDPR certification per se. So there's no program or standard or any way to certify an organization to GDPR. However, British Standard 10,012, especially if certified, provides a critical assurance that management of personal data is being followed in terms of best practice by an organization. And this is especially the case because while maintaining documentation as an organization provides internal evidence of compliance, this is really of only limited value to external parties such as customers, the public, and regulators. And for this reason, greater assurance can only be secured if an organization's PIMS is assessed by an independent third party, which again can be achieved through certification. Finally, it's also important to consider that while for now we're talking about the British Standard 10,012, it's worth noting that the International Organization for Standards, so ISO, is developing an international standard for a PIMS, which is likely to be based largely on British Standard 10,012. So this not only provides more strength to this standard or to this management system type of standard, but also in terms of its recognition as well. To fully leverage the benefits of the British Standard 10012 and PIMS, IT governance offers you and your organization a set of products and services to aid you and your organization in the British Standard 10012 implementation and certification. As you can see in your screen, there's those several products there on your right, but also a way to contact our organization. It's worth mentioning that you can purchase the standards from our website, and also available to you there's a British Standard 10012 lead implementer training course beginning in March. 4th of March in London we'll have a training on this, and others in the near future. It's also worth noting in terms of training courses that there is currently a promotion on the price for this training courses. But not only in terms of documentation and training, we also have available British Standard 10012 consultancy. So in terms of conducting a gap analysis or internal audits, or even aiding with implementation work of this standard or of a personal information management system. On top of that, we have on the website available free of charge a green paper that will contain the reasonings that we explained here today and others. So for your perhaps a good place to begin with. And that's it for today in terms of the introduction to the British Standard 2012. I will now encourage you to forward all your questions to my chat box, and I'll read them out loud and address them one by one. Any questions? Anything at all? Anything at all? Any questions on any of the matters covered today, and even others? Okay. Let's see. So we have several questions. Let's address them. So we have a question here. Can we have a copy of the slides afterwards, please? Well, all the slides will be made available to all registrants within a few days from the date of the webinar. There's several questions that are more technical. I will not focus on those right now. So are there any plans for this British standard to progress to ISO? So yes, as I said in these last few slides, there is very likely probability that this British standard will be the base for the ISO covering this. If I recall correctly, the ISO number for this personal information management system, it's 27552, and I see some questions around this standards as well. We also have a good question here. So what is the average time you expect implementation to take? So I'm afraid I have to give a lawyer's answer on this one. Basically, it depends on the size of the organization and the type of arrangements or number of arrangements that will be necessary. I think it could range from project initiation to certification. It can take 6 months to 1 year. It really depends on the size of the organization as well. We have a question. So Christine is asking, is this equally applicable to smaller companies? We are 10 employees. So definitely. So this British standard is really designed for organizations of all sizes and industries and sectors. So it allows you to fine tune what is appropriate to you in terms, based on risk. Again, GDPR is risk based. So is this British standard 10,012. It allows you to upscale or downscale the measures that you need to take for what are your appropriate technical and organizational measures. So we have a question with regards to the price of the course. To my understanding, at the moment we have almost a £500 discount, which brings down the price to £1,225, which you can confirm on the website. Again, there will be a course taking place in London on the 4th of March and more coming soon as well. You can register via the website. Is there any target date for an official GDPR certification being available? Well, I'm not aware of any GDPR certification being available in the near future. There is certainly not a target date for it. The situation is that the GDPR as a law contemplates this possibility. I think both supervisory authorities and organizations that want to create these certification programs, they're still coming to terms with this. It's definitely worth keeping an eye on developments around this topic, but there's definitely not a target date, a formal date on when this has to be available. It is something that will come with time. So someone asked, is there any target date for an official GDPR certification being available? Or what's the approximate cost of certification and implementing the standards? Well, again, this will really depend on the time necessary. I think if you seek external help or do it internally, obviously this answer will also differ. I think it's worth going to our website and see the different possibilities. What is worth noting is that IT governance can provide a mix of solutions, of products and services, including the help of several consultants that can help you with the different disciplines that this would require. So information security to GDPR or privacy and data protection consultants. And depending on the modalities that you choose and how long we estimate that it will be necessary, the cost will vary. I invite you to go to the website or to speak with our service center to get more information on that. As you can understand, I'm a consultant, not really so versed on the marketing or sales details. Okay, looking into other questions. So Wendy asks, has there been any engagement with the ICO about the content of the standard and if they are receptive to this and businesses adopting it? Well, I'm not aware myself of any mention of the ICO on this topic. What I do know is that knowing the standards and that it provides really an assurance to regulators. If effectively implemented, it provides an assurance to regulators that appropriate technical organizational measures have been put in place, especially if it's certified. Basically, the standard at the moment is the GDPR systematized in another way. So basically, as I said during the webinar, it really organizes the requirements coherently for organizations. So if that's personal information management system is operating effectively, it means that the organization is complying with the requirements placed on organizations, for GDPR. So the ICO, I think, would always look with good eyes to having a fully functioning and effective personal information management system against these standards always look at it as a strong commitment to compliance with the law. So someone asks, what qualification does the BS training give the attendee? So the British Standard 2012 Lead Implementer course will certify delegates as, well, lead implementers. So some workers and professionals able to implement effectively a personal information management system in an organization. So what the course does is it walks through the reasonings of some basics on GDPR, management system basics, and explains the structure of the British Standard 2012. And then, more importantly, it goes into detail on how to implement and link the processes and components of the personal information management system, and also how to take the best approach in doing so according to IT governance's experience. So someone asks, is it anticipated that GDPR will require this certification rather than ISO 27001? And what are the advantages of this certification over ISO 27001? Well, I really believe, as I explained during the webinar, that they are not alternatives. I think rather they are complements to each other. Again, I would like to highlight the possibility to integrate these two management systems, as they provide a good overlap in terms of complying with all the requirements, all the aspects of the GDPR in terms of privacy and data protection, for example, the principles set out in the GDPR, but also the underlying information security for protecting that personal data while respecting the principles set out in the GDPR. So Jan de Souza asks, what about GDPR on a global scale? Our company has offices in Singapore, US, Europe, and Dubai. So British 2012, again, is aligned with the GDPR. So it allows organizations to put in place processes and the policies to deal with, for example, transfers of personal data to outside of the organization or within the organization. Basically, it requires all the arrangements necessary as set out by GDPR, including for organizations that have a global scope, that have subsidiaries or have a multinational structure. Is there a cost to accessing the green paper? No. So you can find the green paper available in our website free of charge. So someone asks, we have already put in place some measures to comply with the GDPR. Can we build on them when developing PIMS, or we need to start completely anew? So absolutely not. So actually, if I were to advise on an organization implementing a PIMS, I would actually look into first into the already existing measures put in place, and actually accommodate those measures into what will become the personal information management system, rather than scratching everything or placing a personal information management system on top of those. So the management system will always accommodate for those measures already undertaken, because again they will be aligned. The standard is aligned with the GDPR, so it will just be not starting from square zero, but rather just already being able to leverage and rely on prior work, which is good. So the PIMS doesn't have any complications on that level. Someone asks a very good question. As a British standard, does this standard only take into account the derogations of the GDPR as applied in the UK? So yes, this is a British standard. It is aligned with GDPR and the UK Data Protection Act of 2018. And it is the last annex, A1 2018, specifically addresses this UK law. But like I said, it also allows the organization and creates the controls necessary to identify any other regulatory requirements. So for example, if your organization is operating or processing personal data or somehow subject to laws in another member state where the derogations have been set in another way. For example, children's consent age under Article 8 is different from one country to another. The PIMS actually sets out the controls to accommodate for this, that that organization is prepared to identify these different requirements arising from derogations of different member states. Basically, every slight difference between GDPR or any national laws are also identified as parts of the management system. So someone asks, which body approves certifications? Is it the supervisory authority, the ICO? If so, what happens after Brexit when the ICO is no longer supervisory authority? So the supervisory authority is not the one issuing certificates for organizations' personal information management systems against the British Standard 10,012. So in practice, if you have a British standard, Brexit does not really affect you in terms of the politics of supervisory authorities. Dimitris asks a very good question. So what are the procedures that are overlapped with ISO 27001 as examples? I asked for the core procedures such as access control. So the British Standard 10,012 has a common structure with the ISO standards for management systems. For example, clauses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, they are basically the same, just to have minor differences, and obviously we'll have different needs and controls put in place for them. But in the same way that you have identification of the context of the organization for an ISMS, you also do that for a PIMS. So you understand what is the scope of the organization, you understand what are the different interfaces, you understand what are different physical locations, the structure of the organization, external requirements. All of those things are identified in the same way for the PIMS that they are for an ISMS. And then, in terms of specific controls, such as the example provided by Dimitris, access control, these things are not mandated necessarily by the PIMS itself, in the same way that ISMS does. Again, this is why it's important to look at them as complements. Basically, PIMS will look into what the GDPR asks for. It does provide some more specific controls to comply with them, but in terms of information security controls, for example, they have to be brought from other standards, if not just by knowledge of the organization implementing the necessary controls. Sue asks if would data centers benefit from awareness of BS 10,012? Well, I would say that data centers or any organization would benefit from British Standard 10,012. And if they are implementing one, of course, all members of staff, as appropriate to their role, should be aware of the existence of that management system for personal information. In general, they should be aware of information security and privacy data protection arrangements and the policy of the organization around that. And the standard does set out requirements for putting in place the appropriate training and awareness campaigns for organizations' staff. Any other questions that I did not address so far? Okay, if that's all from you, I will then take an take us concluded this webinar of today. I thank you so much for your attention, and again I invite you to go to our website and see the possible products and services available. And if that's the case, good luck with your implementation efforts of the personal information management system, and have a nice evening.